So last week Mike talked about the value of reading your Bibles. So hopefully everybody was reading every day after he... No? Okay. Well, Dwayne, we might give you a dispensation since you were kind of out with surgery there. So prior to that, we spent 2 weeks looking at creation and drawing out some lessons that we can learn from that. And this week we're going to continue in that theme, moving on to what the Bible has to say about man. We will, of course, not cover everything that the Bible has to say about men, women, and humankind in general, because that would be a topic for many, many weeks, as I was lamenting to my wife last night, saying it's hard to pick out what are the most important things that we should talk about for a roughly 45-minute class. The challenge being that over the last semester I got used to a 70-minute lecture period twice a week, which is 25 more minutes than we have. So I'm doing my best, guys. All right. So if you were here for our 2 weeks of discussion on creation, one of the ways that the primary way that we framed that discussion is not simply that creation is a discussion about first things or about origins, but we cannot understand creation properly if we don't put it in its full biblical context, which means we need to keep in mind the last things, that is, where we are going, because God did not create without a plan. He had an intention in mind when he created everything, and man sinned, and God had a plan to redeem man, and all of those things come together and come to their head in Jesus Christ, which was the topic of our sermon last week, if you weren't here. So, as we think about man and what the Bible has to say about humankind, the same principle applies. When we look at particularly the first 2 chapters of Genesis, where we'll spend a lot of our time this morning, we're not just thinking about the first things, God at the origin, but also what God intended and how that is revealed to us in the person of Christ. Now, we're not going to cover all of that because a lot of those topics are also going to come into play when we talk about sin later on and law later on, and so I've deferred some of those to those later discussions because they fit in a little bit better there. So, to begin with, we're going to start in Romans chapter 8, which is the place we always go when we're talking about what human beings are. Romans chapter 8, we're going to look at verses 18 through 23, and this is going to set the context here. Paul writes, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body." Now, the thing that I want you to keep in mind here, as we go throughout the rest of the morning here, is that Paul here is putting the context of our redemption into the larger context of the redemption of the entire creation. Remember, the vision at the end of Revelation is not simply... Okay, Mike's going to be our feet this morning. The vision at the end of Revelation is not simply that all of the saints are delivered and they're glorified and they spend eternity praising around the throne of God, but there's this whole new heavens and new earth motif which shows up in the Old Testament prophets as well that's also integral to that vision, okay? So the idea is the entire creation is going to be redeemed, and man as the crown jewel of creation, will say, is central to that, but not the only thing that is going to be redeemed. So keep that in mind as we go through here. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 1. We have the 6 days of creation and the 1 day of rest. And there's a pattern here. We set aside the 1 day of rest. The other 6 days can be divided into 3 parallel series. And this is the context of the narrative in which creation happens. So day 1, what does God create on day 1? Shout it out. Light and? No, not the heavens. Light and? Darkness. There we go. So God divides the light from the darkness. He calls the light day, the darkness night, and it was good. We've got the division. Day 2, what happens? Okay, we have the waters or the firmament, and again, what does God do there?
He separated the water and the land.
That's day 3.
Oh, okay.
Colleen's ahead of us. Yes, he separates the waters above from the waters below. So you get the sky and the sea. Again, an active division. Then Colleen's already given us the answer for day 3. Day 3 is land and water, and again, he divides them. Okay, and then we get plants. That's our first series. So the first series of 3 days, we have division. Light from day, sky from the waters below, and then land from the waters. The second series is days 4 through 6. Day 4, what is created? Sun, moon, and stars. And what does it say at the end of that section? God sets them up to do what? The sun is to what the day, and the moon? No, not evening and morning. That's been a pattern since day 1. Verse 18. You're one too far. Okay, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. So the sun and the moon are set up as rulers over what was divided on the first day, the light and the darkness. Day 5, what's created? Fish and birds. All right. All of these things arise, and then what does God say to them in verse 22? All right, be fruitful, multiply, fill the air, fill the seas. All right? So the second thing that's divided, the sky and the seas, these are given to the birds and the fishes. And then day 6, what's created first? Land animals. All right, and now the narrative is a little bit, the pattern breaks here. You have to go down to verse 30 for this one. But then what's given to the beasts of the earth?
Green plants for food.
Green plants for food, all right. So to every beast of the earth, every bird of the air, and everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. All right? So now the beasts of the earth have the fruit of the earth as their food in the same way that the birds of the air and the fish of the sea do. No, God doesn't tell the beasts of the earth to be fruitful and multiply explicitly in the text, so you can ponder why there are so many stinky mosquitoes on your own time, I suppose, since he didn't explicitly command them to be fruitful and multiply. Just a thought. All right, so we have this pattern. The light, the dark, the water, the sky, the water, and the earth, and then sun, moon, and stars, birds, fish, animals, and man, each corresponding to their own realm, and then each thing is given dominion over that particular part. And after each one of these days, except for day 2, for whatever reason, God calls it good. All right? He speaks, it happens, and he declares the response good. The final thing created on day 6 is man, okay? And this is the final thing created at the very end, and man gets a couple of special additional commands that the other creatures do not. And there's also more attention paid to the creation of man. There's a little bit more text telling us what's going on here. Okay? So, and it is after this day that God calls the creation of man very good in particular, which is different from the way that he describes every other day. All right. So let's think more about the creation of man here. All right. The first thing to note from the creation of man is, or the first question that we want to ask is, does man create himself? No. Okay. Man is created by God. He does not create himself. So we have Psalm 100, verse 3. It is he who has made us and not we ourselves. Okay? So does anybody remember from our discussion of creation, we said the first thing that we learned from creation is that there are two categories of reality. There are two things. And what are those? If in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then there are two divisions. We're going to start passing out note sheets. Not light and dark. Those are the second category. In the beginning, who created? God. Okay, God's the first one. And if he created everything else, then everything else falls into the category of creation, a creature, not God. Yeah. Okay, so we have the creator and we have the creation. And these are the two basic divisions of reality. God preexists everything, everything comes from him. Okay? So to begin with, man is already in a particular relationship since he does not create himself, and that is of a creature to the creator. Okay? That's the beginning. Now, what happens after that? Because there are more people than just Adam. So what happens at the end of chapter 2 of Genesis? You can shout it out, you can raise your hand, and Mike will bring you a microphone.
Man is creation of one flesh through marriage, essentially.
You skipped a step. Woman, yeah. Before you can have marriage between a man and a woman, you have to have a woman. Adam didn't marry himself. I'm not sure how that would have worked. All right, and how was the woman created? A rib taken from the side of Adam, right? So Adam first is formed from the dust. Eve is formed from Adam. And then hop ahead to chapter 5, right at the beginning. Verses 1 through 3. What happens? We have Cain and Abel, but here it gives us a useful description. Genesis chapter 5, 1 through 3. Why doesn't somebody read that for us and tell us what's happening there? 1 through 3. Dalton's got it for us. Hold on, and Mike will give you a microphone. That way anybody joining us online can hear.
This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth.
All right. So we're all used to Genesis 1:26. God created man and woman in his image and his likeness. And here in chapter 5, verse 3, it says, what about Seth? What about Adam and Eve's children? They are begotten in what? His likeness, right? So humanity has within itself the capacity to reproduce. Like begets like. Human beings beget other human beings, okay? And so thinking about those two things, Eve from the rib of Adam, and then children in their image and likeness from Adam and Eve, what can we say about human beings when they're born? Okay, they're in the image of their parents. Now we're already in the relationship of creature to God the Creator. Now transpose that into parents and children. I've already given you the answer. Well, they're also in the image of God. To think about relationships, right? The point we want to not miss is that people are already embedded in webs of relationships when they are born. Okay? You're already in a relationship with God, whether you're conscious of it or not, and you aren't when you're an infant, of creature to creator, and you're already in a relationship of parent-child with your parents. Human beings only come from other human beings. Okay? Modern advances in assisted reproductive technology notwithstanding, the materials still come from human beings. Okay? There are no synthetic human beings, at least yet. Although there are people trying. We won't get into that. The point here being that everybody is in a relationship with their parents. The only people who don't have parents in the traditional sense are Adam, who's formed directly from the dust, and Eve, who comes from a rib. Everybody else in the history of the world, even Jesus, gestates for 9 months and then is born. and there's a definite point at which they enter the world writ large. Okay? So everybody is already in these webs of relationships. Now we could spin this out farther. Okay? We could say if you have brothers and sisters who are older than you didn't get to choose them. You were born and you already have brothers and sisters. Your brothers and sisters, if you look around this room, these are ones that you chose. That's a relationship that you entered into. If you're married, you entered into another relationship when you married your husband or your wife. Okay? If you were born in the United States, you are by birthright a citizen of the United States, so you have a particular relationship with the other people that you meet as fellow citizens, and you have a particular relationship with the state as a subject in a certain sense. Okay? People are enmeshed in webs of relationships all around. And an interesting study is to go through and think about all of the different sorts of relationships that Scripture talks about with respect to human beings. And then you can look at how Christ defines what those relationships ought to look like in his life. There are 7 major ones that I have in a list. See if you can come up with them as well. All right. So we can keep on going like this, but another thing that we want to draw from this, remember when we talked about creation, we said there are 3 major themes here. There's that God creates everything. Everything is going to God was the third one. And in the middle we said, what is it about creation from moment to moment? God does what for us? He sustains it, okay? God continually sustains it. So we are continually independent on our Creator, all right? We are not independent of him. The universe is not independent of him. And the same is true throughout our lives as well. When you were a baby, you couldn't take care of yourself, all right? If you had just been born and then left on a table in the hospital, you would have died without your parents to give you food, change your diaper, keep you warm, and all of those other things. Now, most of us grow out of that. We grow up, we become independent, we move out, we can take care of ourselves. But then what happens to us as we age? Are we as able to take care of ourselves? Nope. We start to need assistance. We start to need canes and walkers. We need people to pick up the heavy things for us. Okay? We begin in a place of dependence. We come to a place at least of superficial independence, but eventually we go back to a place of dependence. Eventually we come back to a time where we can no longer deny the fact that we need people around us, that we need help as we live our lives. Okay? And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is that one of the lies that we tell ourselves in our contemporary culture is that we're all independent. We have the capacity to make ourselves. We don't need other people. What's important are our own goals and desires. And at the very beginning of Genesis and the account of the creation of man, what we see is that man is enmeshed in these webs of relationships. We are not independent creatures, we are dependent creatures. And it is good. Okay? Remember, what does God say before looking for a helpmeet from Adam? What does he say to himself? Louder.
What does God say about Adam? It's not good for him to be alone.
Exactly. It is not good for the man to be alone, he says. Okay? It is not good for the man to be alone. Man has been created to be in relationships with other people and with God. All right. Following on from that now, we're going to skip around a little bit and go back and look at the blessings and the commands that God gives to the man and the woman. So this is in chapter 1, verses, we'll focus on 28 through 29, and then also chapter 2, verse 15, regarding the garden. All right. I'm going to read 28 and 29 of Genesis chapter 1. And I want you to tell me what are the blessings and the commands that God gives there. All right? So God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food." All right, commands and blessings in those two verses. Fill the earth is one.
So we're to fill the earth and subdue it and rule. So we have some kind of dominion and responsibility.
Okay, good. So we have some sort of dominion, and Elizabeth has added on an important qualification, and we'll follow up on this in just a minute, and responsibility, okay, in there. It's not straight rule. Okay, so we have to fill the earth, we have subdue it. What else?
Eat from it.
Okay, it's given to us for our sustenance. And then the first one that comes before filling it. Dwayne, you have this on the wall in your living room. Be fruitful and multiply. There we go. We're in Dwayne's small group, so I know what his living room looks like. Yeah, we also know about the state of the home improvement going on. All right, so be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over it. It's given to them for food. Somebody to go over to Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. This is after the planting of the Garden of Eden, and God puts Adam in it, and then he gives him something to do.
The Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it.
All right, to work it and to take care of it. This goes along with what Elizabeth said about having dominion and having a responsibility. All right, so how many of you are gardeners or have tried to grow plants? I'm in the second group. We try. Well, he'd be disappointed in ours too. The ground is definitely cursed for me. But for those of you who are gardeners, or you can think about tending animals, perhaps because the Larimores have cattle, all right? If you want to get produce from your garden, what do you have to do for those plants?
Feed and water.
You have to feed and water them, okay? And do you do that randomly, Mike?
No.
No. Okay, what do you look for?
You usually set up a schedule.
Okay, you set up a schedule, and you don't want to underwater them or overwater them.
Water them.
Yeah, you don't want to do either one, right? Okay. Does a sick plant produce fruit?
Poorly.
Poorly sometimes, yeah. And it's not very tasty either. Healthy plants, flourishing plants produce fruit, all right? So when God puts Adam in the garden to tend it and to keep it, and he gives of the produce of the garden for Adam to eat, every living thing that is good for food is planted in the garden, he gives Adam this mandate, and for Adam to partake of the produce of the garden, he has to make sure that the garden flourishes, which is the idea of tending and keeping it, or working it, okay? So Adam is given the garden to rule over, but he's not given it to exploit. He's not given it to just take all the fruit that he wants and eat it all and ignore the good of the garden. He only gets to do that if he takes care of the garden. So he has, as Elizabeth pointed out for us, a responsibility to that garden, to take care of it in the way that a garden needs to be taken care of. Okay? And this is another sort of relationship that humans find themselves in. Given dominion over the earth, it is a sort of stewardship, not of absolute power. All right? So one of these things we talked about with respect to creation, but we go back to Acts chapter 17, verse 25. This is Paul's sermon on Mars Hill, and he says of God that God gives to all life and breath and all things. Right? He gives it to us. Another verse Paul cites this at the end of Romans chapter 11, and he's referring here to Job chapter 41. So this is God addressing Job at the end of that book, and this follows God's picture of the Leviathan. And at the end of that section, God says rhetorically to Job, "Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine." All right? The idea being there, you can't get out ahead of God. You can't put God in your debt by giving him something that he requires. Okay? Everything is already God's. So when Adam and Eve are given the command to rule over the earth, and they're given the command to tend the garden and to keep it, they're given those commands as stewards, not as owners. It's delegated authority. They're exercising rule on behalf of God, who sets them up as people to do that. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So it's not that we're not allowed to take things from creation for our own benefit and use, but Adam and Eve are never intended to strip mine creation, to use a metaphor here, and burn everything down for their own benefit without any attention paid to the good of the things that they're using. All right. So let's talk here about what the man and the woman are, or who they are, perhaps would be the better way to describe it. Okay, so what we've established so far is that man and woman are created as the pinnacle of creation. They're given this commandment to rule over the earth, which means to look after the good of the earth on behalf of God. It's delegated authority. So now, what are these creatures that God has made? Because they get a little bit more attention than anything else in the creation account. God talks about making them in his own likeness and image. It's going to show up again in Genesis 5, we saw. Chapter 2 talks about God forming man from the dust of the earth. So what is it that a man and a woman are? All right. The first thing to note is a little bit of wordplay in here that is not apparent in English translation. All right. So Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. It says, "The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." All right. Now, the wordplay here is that in Hebrew, Adam is ha-adam, and from the ground is a phrase min ha-adamah. All right, so the man from dust, Adam, comes from the ground, ha-adamah. Okay, so there's, even in the words, there's a continuity from ground, dust of the ground, to the man. You jump down now to the creation of Eve in verse 23. Yeah, 23. Okay, and Adam has this line, "She is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh." And he says, "She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." All right, and again here, there's another word play. She is called woman, Isha, because she's taken out of man, Ish. Okay, so Ish, man, Isha, woman. All right, there's this linguistic continuity here. All right, as we already talked about, there is... as we already talked about the relationships, all right, in terms of making and begetting and so on, between man and woman and man and God and so on, this is reflected in the language of the account that Moses writes here. Now, what does God form from the dust for the man? Louder. Eve. Not Eve. She's not formed from the dust of the ground. Oh, no. She's from Adam's rib. Yeah, the flesh and the bone. So he creates a body for Adam out of the dust. Yeah, so usually when we go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, we usually do something like, here's the creation of the body, and God breathes into him a soul or something like that, right? So God creates a body for Adam out of the dust here. Eve also gets a body. All of us have bodies. We all have different relationships with our bodies. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not, right? What does God pronounce at the end of day 6?
Good. Everything is good.
Not just good,
And finished.
not finished. Very good. Chris has got it. He pronounces it very good. Does anybody remember there's something else, and I don't have a good enough memory of all the different translations to know how well this is translated in all of them. Does anybody remember the particulars of how that's written there at the end of Genesis 1? Yeah. I know we mentioned it, at least in passing. How much emphasis is placed on that? Yeah, he repeats it after every day.
So he sums it all up as well.
He sums it all up. Okay, you should have something there that's something like, indeed it was very good, or behold it was very good, or something like that. Okay, behold it was very good. I think King James has that in there. The idea here, there's a Hebrew word in there. Greek has this too. We don't use it in English anymore, but the idea is, look at this. Look at this thing that I have made. And it's for emphasis. So after creating man, this is when God tells us, behold, it was very good. Okay? And God creates all of this. He creates bodies for Adam and Eve, body and soul. And then he says it was very good. Okay? So what does that tell us about the stuff we're made from? Are our bodies a problem? Or are they blessed by God? They're blessed by God. Yeah. Okay? The fact that you have a body, you can clap your hands and run or walk or do any of the other things that bodies do, sweat, perhaps. We're doing a lot of that right now. This is good. All right? And this is both something that we have forgotten today, but also something that is radical at the time that this is being written. And it's radical at the time of the New Testament as well. So one of the earliest heresies, and we find evidence of this in places like the letters of John and the letter to the Colossians and others, is the Gnostic heresies. And the Gnostics basically tried to synthesize Greek philosophy and all of its aspects with the Bible. And in doing so, what they adopted from people like Plato is that the body is the prison house of the soul, is how Plato describes it. Okay? So your body is a problem, and the idea is that your soul needs to be liberated from the body so that it can become closer to God. And Gnostic comes from the word for knowledge, so the way that they saw that happening is by mental enlightenment. So as you progress deeper into the mysteries of the faith, your soul is progressively liberated from the body so that you can ascend to God. Okay? This is not true. All right? But the reason that it's important is because the Gnostics got the problem wrong. Plato got the problem wrong. They saw the body as a problem and the soul's in need of liberation. At the very beginning, in Genesis, God creates the bodies of Adam and Eve, and he creates them very good. They're part of the plan. They're part of God's design for what it means to be a human. Okay? And this is also integral, as we studied in Hebrews when we were going through that book, for Jesus and the incarnation. Chapter 2, major theme at the end of Hebrews chapter 2, is that Jesus had to have a body. All right, and the language there is strong, and there's really no other way to interpret it, and that it was necessary for him to take on flesh and blood. You get down to chapter 10, where the writer is talking about the reality of Christ's sacrifice, and quoting from the 40th Psalm, he says, "Behold, a body you have prepared for me." Okay? This is integral to the incarnation, and one part of the Gnostic heresies, again, was they denied the physical reality of the incarnation. So Jesus only appeared to be human. It only seemed like he had a body, okay? But this is not the case. So another lesson that we want to take from this is no matter how painful things can get, how much it seems like our body is against us or that it's not working or it won't do the things that we want it to do, one of the things that we want to remember here is that God created these to be very good. The reality of sickness and death is a consequence of sin, not of God's good design. Okay? We can see this further if we go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So if you flip over there, this is the great resurrection chapter where Paul talks about how important it is. It's critical, he says, to the gospel that Christ was raised from the dead. And at the end of this, he has this kind of lengthy and odd-sounding passage about the body. And I'm going to sum it up here because we are running short on time. He starts out in verse 39 with this phrase, all flesh is not the same flesh, and then he talks about how there are different kinds of flesh. So there's a flesh of man, of animals, of fish, and so on. And then he says there are also celestial bodies and there are terrestrial bodies, and their glory is different. He talks about stars and so on, natural and spiritual bodies. He gets down to verse 45, and now he brings in a comparison between Adam and Jesus. He says, so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, Genesis chapter 2. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, and afterward the spiritual. The first man was of the earth, made of dust. The second man is the Lord from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are made of dust. And as is the heavenly man, so also are those who are heavenly. And as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly man. All right. Now, Paul is driving at an important point here, and it gets lost because we don't always attend to the nuances of how Paul describes various things. So oftentimes, Paul in his letters, he does this in Galatians, he does this in parts of Romans, he contrasts what he calls the flesh and the spirit. And there he treats those as two different principles or patterns for living one's life. Okay, so you can live after the things of the earth, or you can live after the pattern of the things of God, and that's the operative contrast in those passages. What are you patterning your life after? What is not the case there is that Paul is saying that your flesh is bad. Okay? He's using these in a metaphorical sense. When we get to 1 Corinthians 15, though, this causes some problems because here flesh is not the enemy, neither is the body. All right? And the distinction here is that body, the word soma, just means whatever your physical form happens to be. All right, so this happens to be my body. I've got 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, various fingers and toes and other things. But if I were missing 3 fingers from my left hand, not only would I have to learn to write with the other one, but it would still be my body. Okay, there's nothing different about it. On the other hand, flesh can just refer to the stuff that your body is made out of. All right, and this is why Paul begins with a discussion in 39 and in verse 39 by saying all flesh is not the same flesh. All bodies are not made out of the same thing. And what he means is fish, even though we know that chemically, biologically, there are a lot of continuities. Fish still have DNA. You've got DNA. All right, they've got a lot of the same molecules floating around in their bodies as you have in yours. There's something different about fish that is not the same as a person. Okay? So when he talks later on about the resurrection farther down here, his point is not that you're not going to have a body in the resurrection. His point is that the stuff you are made out of is going to be changed. That's the terrestrial, celestial, first Adam, second Adam bit. Okay? The body will still be resurrected. We will still know Mike as Mike. We will still know Dwayne as Dwayne. Okay? Now, maybe God will tone down Dwayne's volume in heaven for us a little bit, but you know. God never creates an error, right, Dwayne? We'll all be able to follow Dwayne in the praises around the throne. Maybe he's being set up as a celestial song leader. All joking aside, though, there is both continuity and discontinuity in the vision that Paul presents for us, all right? You're going to have a body in some sense. You're going to be recognizably you, but it's not going to be a body that decays anymore. It's not going to be a body that gets sick. It's going to be a body that works. Now, plenty of people have speculated about, well, what if you were born missing a foot, for instance? Or if you suffered an accident and you lost the use of your legs in midlife, what is your body going to look like in heaven? Well, the answer is I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly what that's going to be like. Maybe it won't be an issue. Maybe you will have a new foot. I don't know. But what we are told is that all of us is going to be redeemed. It's not just the cleansing of sin from your soul, it's that your whole body is going to be changed, Paul says, into something different. What precisely that is has not been revealed to us yet. But the whole person is saved. All right. We have about a minute and a half left. And so the point at which I want to leave you, which will be the stepping off point for further topics, we're in a good place for, which is right here at the end of 1 Corinthians 15. So the very end of this passage, 45 through 49, is Paul making a contrast between the first Adam, the man of earth, and the second Adam, the man of the Spirit. Between Adam, the historical person, and Jesus Christ, the historical person, God taking on man in the flesh. And here, he's setting up a contrast. If this sounds a lot like the end of Romans chapter 5, the first Adam and the last Adam, I don't think that's an accident, and that's something that we're going to come back to. But here it says, just as we have been in the image, or the resemblance, of the first Adam, so we shall be in the image, or the resemblance, of the last Adam, or the second Adam, who is Christ. All right, and here we have our beginning and our end. Who are you going to reflect? You've reflected so far Adam, his body made of dust, it decays, it can die. Are you going to reflect Christ, who is raised victorious to an inheritance incorruptible and kept above for us? Okay? So here Paul is setting up something, he's pulling on themes that he's talked about already in 1 Corinthians, actually, but the idea is one of who is your example? Who is your pattern? What are you going to be patterned after? We're all made in the image of Adam through begetting. We can pull back a chain. The question for the new man, for the new creation, is are you going to be recreated in the image of Christ? I'll get to you in just a minute, Mike. All right? So in future weeks, when we get to talking about things like sin, one of the things that we want to be attentive to is how we pattern our lives, what it is that vision directs us to in our actions, who we are reflecting. All right, Mike, go ahead.
Keep bringing up the word pattern,
Yeah.
which I love. You started out that way. You also used the word design. Mm-hmm. And if you really... Anyway, you really think about God and his patterns, it's never ceasing. He starts out with a pattern in the Bible. He's the author of the Bible. Christ is the subject of the Bible. We see a pattern explained when building the ark, when putting the tabernacle together. We see a pattern for worship today. We see a pattern of salvation. So that word is very specific, and that word we should reflect upon a lot more.
Yeah, I think that's about as good of a place to end. I'll leave you with the teaser for upcoming weeks, is that morality is not about following rules. Morality is about copying people. We'll get to that, and hopefully I'll be able to convince you of that thesis in coming weeks. But for now, thank you for your participation, and we'll see you next time.